Okay, so this is my report on the interview that I did with the principal of Saskatoon Christian School, Mr. Doug Nya. Um, he has been the principal now for not even a year. He got hired in the summer of this year. And so this year is his first year as principal of Saskatoon Christian School, which proved to make the interview quite interesting because there actually wasn't a lot of notable experiences that he could call on during this year in terms of how he's implemented change. So he got hired quite late in the year, like in the summer, and was just kind of thrown into this job. And his whole process of being the new guy, the new principal, the new boss, was to get to know people. That was his tactic. That was his style. His whole thing was like, I can't come into this space and start with a plan and start trying to change things. His approach was entirely relational. He just needed to get a sense of how everything worked and how to build relationships with people and what's the culture here. He said that he's been the new principal in many different schools, so he's been through the experience before, but has never worked in a Christian school, and so that was a new thing. But his best piece of advice for being the new principal was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So his entire approach is about listening. Listening is key when being a leader in a new situation. Instead of what do I need to know? No. Instead of what do I need to change, it's what do I need to know. And so much of his job was, how do I get people to know me? How do I get people to know me? Now he got approved to stay for the next 3 years. So he said that only right now at the end of March has he really began to think about what he wants to change and how to approach that. And because he's trying to bring change in incrementally, he has to over communicate it. He has to really communicate it frequently and early enough so that people can get on board with it. He talked about how he didn't necessarily build an eager coalition because when he came in, he had his coalition chosen for him. The staff was chosen, the administrators were chosen. So he had to learn how to make the most of who was around him and figuring out who he could lean on. So who's strong, and then also who needs coaching, who on the staff needs support from him as the principal. He said that his biggest support is the vice principal, Mr. Murray Long. And Murray's been there for like 20 years, I'm pretty sure. And so Murray has seen the school grow and change. He's seen all the different principals that have come and gone. And so Doug's greatest tool in his toolkit was actually leaning on Murray. And Doug's whole thing is like, he's been a teacher, he's been a vice principal, and he's been a principal. And he just understands how having a relational principal in a school who is interested in what other people think is huge, because he's had principals in the past who come in with their plan and they just impose their plan on everyone, and no one likes that guy because people want to be included in the way that things are changing. Now, in terms of like actually implementing change, we talked about the concept of eating an elephant and how you do that one bite at a time. And he said that that's something that he's really had to like hone in on because he's new. He doesn't quite fully understand how everything works yet. And so when he's thinking about change, it has to be small. It has to be incremental. And a lot of it is like picking the low-hanging fruit and change that kind of already exists in a way where he could amplify it and make it truly happen. He said that he said that so much of the change that happens at the school is dependent on the projected enrollment of the next year. And so even when he's thinking about ideas for change, so much of that is dependent on the financial situation of the next year. And so they have to be especially strategic when trying to change things, because they can't change things too brashly or too quickly, because it just won't work. There isn't the time or the space to actually make it happen. Another thing that was really important to Doug is being a leader that can take in feedback, and who asks for feedback, and who's looking to build relationship and healthy streams of communication in his leadership. And so a lot of what he does is like anonymous surveys, where he'll give these surveys out to the staff and ask them, how do you think I've been doing? What would you say is good? What do you think needs to change? Things like that. And he's noticed that people are actually quite honest in those surveys, which allows him to lead better. But he also knows that it's not a popularity race, especially as the principal, especially as the new guy. It's not a popularity competition, and he's learned to accept that, having been the new principal several times before already. He said that he has learned how to join forces with the early adopters, which are the people who are jumping in on the change that you're trying to do. These are like the people in your eager coalition. And he says that commissioning those people to work on the unmovable members in the organization is key. Because if you can get fellow teachers to be in the staff rooms, in the hallways, in the conversations, being like, oh yeah, like, I'm really into this change, I want to see this change happen, it really helps the people who take more time process and start thinking about the changes that need to happen. Doug also hit on the necessity of over communicating change all of the time. So to be communicating why we're doing this all of the time, communicating the vision to people, right? And inviting them into the vision and getting people on board with the vision, so that when change needs to be implemented, they're already on board with the vision. But I think because Doug is the new guy, he's really trying to win people's affections in just his own self and his own leadership style, so that when he begins to implement change, they are on board with it because they like that guy, they think he leads well, or that he has integrity, or whatever that is. When I asked Doug about what do you do with people who just can't handle the change, he talked so much about coaching. He really said that letting people go, or even letting them leave, is really the last resort. He really believes in people. He really believes in relationship and in investing in people to see them grow. And so for him, if you have people on your team who are resistant to change, or who are having a hard time keeping up with the vision, his solution is to coach them and to actually spend extra time on them and to invest in them more, because they matter. And especially at Saskatoon Christian School, if a teacher leaves or they get let go, it's not like they're falling into the greater school division where they could get a job again. SCS is entirely independent, and so they don't have that luxury of just hopping back into a new job in the same school district. We also talked about how prayer informs so much of the leadership at Saskatoon Christian School. And Doug said that this has been really cool for him, because he's an elder and has been a leader at his church for like 20 years. But he always felt like the way that he led as a church leader and as a principal were always really different. But this year, he's seen a bit of a wedding between those two leadership styles. And so he's just really come to embrace the praying in meetings and one-on-one coachings and in family tours and in strategy meetings. And he's just found that that's improved his leadership style, and improved the way that he implements change, because he can really be himself. He can be fully authentic in who he is. But he also said that he doesn't want to use prayer in a way that's manipulative, where, well, he's the principal, so if he starts praying in this meeting, he could really make it sound like people have to listen to his change ideas because God said so. So his approach to prayer is actually just being really vulnerable and saying, hey, God, like, we need help, we need support, would you speak into this vision, things like that. And I think he just really wants, like, an equality in the relationship between him and his staff, which I think is really great. Yeah, he said that definitely, like, praying into decisions, praying into change has been a huge thing for him. We also talked about the principle of people decisions and not delaying those hard people decisions. For him, because his last resort is letting people go, a lot of it is, how do you not delay coaching the people who need coaching? So how do you make sure that everyone is contributing? Everyone needs to be making the team stronger. And if they're not, instead of just letting them go, so much of those people decisions are about actually coaching them up. And those can't be delayed, because coaching takes time and a lot of effort and consistency and building. And so for Doug, I think lots of the change that he implemented during the first couple months of being at the school was actually really strategic coaching to try to support the staff in a way so that they don't have to change a lot or let people go or things like that. So all in all, I found that our So, all in all, I found that our interview naturally hit on the 8 principles of people issues and implementing change, right? So, Doug just naturally loves people, and so much of what he do is based in that realm. He said it himself, he's not very administrative or, like, organized. He's definitely a people person. And so for him, much of the change that he implements has to do with people. But because he's the new principal and he's only been there for a year, not even, and in his first year didn't know if he was getting a 3-year contract to stay or not, there wasn't a lot of change that he could implement. But I think his strategy in terms of just building relationship is an incredibly effective strategy, because now in the next 2 years, people are going to trust him and they're going to be more willing to embrace the changes that he is hoping to execute in the school. You know, and in terms of the steps of sort of implementing change and seeing it truly happen, he hit them all. He talked about over communicating. He talked about being transparent with the staff. He talked about how to deal with the dissenters, or the people who are resistant to change, and lots of that has to do with coaching. And I think too, like, in terms of implementing change, I know that the key is urgency, but I don't think that Saskatoon Christian School actually has the luxury of implementing change in an urgent way. because everything is dependent on next year's projected enrollment. And so much of the change that they do to the organization is like slow burning. And thus far, I'm not sure if Doug has seen much things that he's really wanted to change yet. Maybe because he hasn't been there for very long, or maybe because he didn't want to tell me everything he thought was wrong with the school. But in terms of just how he led, it was just really neat how he articulated a lot of principles that the book hit on. And in terms of the difference between, what he was doing at that school versus what pastors do, I think a lot of it is similar. Because you are dealing with souls, and you're dealing with people's livelihoods and their jobs and their place of community and belonging and income. And so because he's so relational, so people-oriented, so interested in having relationship, I think that enables him to be extra conscientious about the way that he's implementing change, and not just be like a bull in a china shop just plowing through forcing change on people. He said that he's seen it done like that, and he just knows that it doesn't work. And so, all in all, I think that Doug is a great fit for the school. I think he really mixes it up. I think that the last principal was more type A personality, really organized and not very relational. And I think that the culture of the school suffered. I don't know about how effective it was, or how organized it was, or how they dealt with change. But I just see that Doug is so competent in building relationships. And I think that will be his strength moving forward to implement change.